Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are here to take a look at, not this, but that, a Soviet PBS-1 suppressor for the AK. This is the original military issue AK suppressor. And it wasn't the Soviet Union's first foray into suppressors either. They actually used a surprising number of suppressors during World War II. They had one named the Brommet that was used surprisingly extensively on Mosin Nagant rifles. There was doctrinal use for suppressors for special forces troops, for reconnaissance troops, and of course for some political KGB type organizations. But the Soviet Union made a bunch of those. They were familiar with them and how to use them. They made subsonic ammunition for them. And so when the Kalashnikov replaces the Mosin Nagant, it kind of makes sense that they would want to develop a similar sort of accessory capability for the Kalashnikov. In fact, when the Kalashnikov was first adopted in the early mid-1950s, it was part of a complete weapons family where the Kalashnikov actually served as the submachine gun, the SKS was the rifle, and the RPD was the light machine gun. And the original intention with the PBS suppressor, which by the way is Russian for device for silent firing, the initial intention was for it to be a suppressor for that entire family of weapons. Well, that didn't end up really happening because the SKS was completely dropped when they realized that the AK essentially just made the SKS redundant. And the RPD was dropped, well, the suppressor use on the RPD was dropped because they couldn't get it to run reliably with the suppressor and belt feed, and that's understandable, especially in the 1950s. This is being developed initially in about 1954. They start doing testing in 54 and 55, and it takes about 4 years of iteration and testing and iteration and testing to get the thing really working properly. Remember, with the Brommets, it's going on a bolt-action rifle, so it's pretty easy to make it work. It just has to stay on the end of the gun, and it does what it needs to do. With something like this, you need the rifle to still cycle reliably, whether it's using normal ammunition and a bare muzzle or subsonic heavy bullet ammunition and the suppressor. And there's no adjustable gas port on an AK, so this was a bit of a remarkable challenge. They eventually finally got it done and working in 1958. This was the first version of the device, which was just called the PBS. And it was interesting in that it was a clamshell design that folded together and was held together by the locking ring at the back of the can. That's not a great system, and by 1962, they had improved several features of it, including giving it a solid body tube. It became the PBS-1, and that is the version that was used by the Soviet Union for a couple of decades. So let's check it out. The natural place to begin here would be to actually just take it off the rifle. So this is left-hand threaded, so you have to unscrew it the wrong direction to take it off. And I find it kind of interesting that there is no locking notch. There's the notion that because it's left-hand threaded, opposite of the way the rifling is spun, that every shot will actually tighten it down. I'm a little dubious about that. It seems to me it would have been pretty simple to include a notch for the retaining pin that's already built into the rifles right here to lock into the back end of the can. But for whatever reason, they didn't do that. Now that we have this, you do have a spring steel locking tab there. Push that down and you can unscrew the back end of the can. That's nicely coarse threaded, and it is right-hand threaded. We have the back end. We have a big solid rubber baffle, and we have a stack of regular metal baffles. Now, these are all pretty recognizable elements. What's weird about this is the rubber baffle is at the back of the system. Normally, when you encounter a big rubber baffle, typically called a wipe, it goes at the very front of the can because its job is to hold as much gas in the suppressor as possible for as long as possible to reduce the final noise. You'll see this in things like the well rod. And then the idea is, your first shot, you always make sure you run with a pristine, brand new baffle so there's no hole in it and it's maximum quiet with that first shot. And then the baffle lasts 10, 20, rounds, something in that neighborhood, before there's so much of a hole in it that it's not actually reducing the sound of the suppressor at all and you need to replace it. This is here for an entirely different purpose, and that is to actually get the AK that this is mounted on to cycle reliably. So this thing, by sitting at the very back of the system, and you can see that little metal tab there hooks over the outside of the tube to prevent it from moving forward. This is specifically to increase back pressure at the very beginning of the system. So you just have a little bit of a blast chamber here. This rubber baffle is going to hold gas into that, which keeps it pushing backwards on the gas piston of the AK. And this was the solution to that conundrum of how do we balance an AK that has a fixed gas port size so that it will run on regular ammo and subsonic suppressed ammo. So that's very cool. Now the baffle stack here, all being bolted together, very simplistic flat baffles. That's both not very surprising to me. This is typical of even later Soviet suppressor designs. And it's also going to work better than you think. I think a lot of people will look at this and have a pretty snobby attitude that, you know, that's just total crap and who would even bother, like, why even have a suppressor if you're going to make baffles like this? And the answer is, this is going to actually suppress like 90% as well as probably the fanciest baffle stack design that you can come up with. You look at guns like the VSS Vintorez that are really hyped for their suppression ability. Yeah, they've got baffles that are actually less substantial than this. So that's the basic overview of what goes into this here. Now, what I want to show you is the ammunition. So I mentioned, of course, several times that this uses heavy subsonic ammunition. It is specifically a 194 grain bullet that is loaded to travel at about between 950, maybe 1,000 feet per second. So essentially just below the speed of sound, so that it is subsonic. That ammunition is recognizable by a green and black set of stripes on the bullet tip. The ammo can that it comes in, the spam can it comes in, will have a marking just like that. You get it on the boxes, you get it on the bullets, you get it on the ammunition can itself. This ammunition was made at factory 711, this particular batch made in 1971. Yeah, 71. Virtually all of the subsonic AK ammo was made at Klimatov, I believe, factory 711. And what's interesting is, along with 680 rounds of ammunition in 20-round boxes, you would also get one of these. This is a box of spare rubber wipes. This one's already sort of open, so we'll use that. So there you go, a 1971 dated PBS-1 suppressor rubber baffle / wipe that has not been used. You will also typically see suggestions online that these baffles last 25 rounds, 20 rounds, 30 rounds, something in that vicinity. I think that comes from a misunderstanding of treating these like something like well rod baffles. In reality, this is expected to last about 200 rounds because even once you get a hole in it, it's still going to perform its job of increasing back pressure, reducing gas flow through this to keep the gun operating. So in a 680 round crate, you get 3 replacement baffles to work with, and that comes out to just above 200 rounds per. All right, one more thing I want to point out here, and that is the actual size of the hole down the center of this suppressor is way more than 30 caliber. There's our 30 caliber bullet, like that's a 45 caliber hole, give or take. Like the entire cartridge will fit inside there. And that also is not good for suppression. The bigger that hole is, the faster gas is going to go through it and vent right out the end of the suppressor. So why would they make it oversized like that? Well, the answer is this. The threading on the muzzle of the AK was actually designed just to hold a slant brake or a blank firing adapter. These are both devices that have no requirement for precision. You know, it doesn't matter how concentric your threads are on the outside to the actual bore on the inside for mounting a blank firing device. Unfortunately, it does matter if you're mounting a suppressor and you want to avoid having bullets strike the end of the suppressor, because if these threads aren't exactly parallel, you're going parallel to the inside of the bore, you're going to end up with a suppressor that, I'm exaggerating here, but is mounted kind of like that. And as soon as you shoot, the bullet's going to hit sideways into a baffle somewhere. So in order to accommodate that and allow the use of guns that have maybe kind of off-center threading, they deliberately oversized the center core diameter hole of the suppressor so that you've got a lot of leeway to work with. And I think it's important to point out that this isn't the result of sloppy manufacturing. This is the result of having a very loose tolerance on a dimension, on a manufacturing datum that just legitimately doesn't matter. It would be like saying, what is the required flatness of the side right here of the front sight drum? And the answer is, who cares? It really makes no difference at all. So why would we want to waste time and money and energy making this like precision ground exactly flat? Same thing with these muzzle threads. When it was developed, there wasn't anything that was supposed to be mounted out there, so why bother taking the time to make sure that it's totally perfectly precise when you don't need to? Instead, when they discovered that concentricity did matter, they just adapted the suppressor to work around the existing standard. I should note that doctrinally, the rifles that were used with suppressors, and again, this is Bulgarian, this isn't actually a Russian one, but they were intended for use with suppressors and subsonic ammo, or for regular ammunition without a suppressor, because you can easily unscrew that suppressor and you can easily switch out what magazine of ammunition you're using. So what they developed to go along with it, and unfortunately I don't have one to show you here, is a specific rear sight that has the standard calibration on one side like this, but then can be flipped and gives a 1 to 400 meter calibration for use with the suppressor and the subsonic ammunition, because the one part of this system that isn't really easy to change on the fly is swapping out your rear sight. So they developed a unique rear sight that could be used with either type of ammunition. If you do any sort of search on PBS-1, what you're going to get a whole lot of is Dead Air's PBS-1 Wolverine, which is a look-alike suppressor that the Dead Air company released in the United States 10 years ago, I think, as of this filming. And it was designed specifically to be an AK suppressor, and it shares some of the elements of the real PBS, notably the oversized bore so that it can be mounted on potentially not really perfectly accurate muzzle threads, as well as the overall shape and style. As for the internals, the Dead Air Wolverine is completely different from the original PBS-1. That said, it's also going to be a lot more convenient for people to shoot. So it's kind of cool that the Wolverine exists out there as a way to have a functional look-alike of a PBS-1. But if you're interested in knowing how the Soviet Union actually designed and ran its AK suppressors, well, hopefully you enjoyed taking a look at this one. Thanks for watching.